saying, when we start with the Bible as our reference frame, we're working back from what we have in the present in front of us, the scriptures, which give us our philosophical framework. That's our worldview. And we take that worldview and we analyze the other information, the other facts, the other evidences within the framework of the scriptures, because the scriptures provide us with the preconditions of intelligibility. What is intelligible, what makes sense, what we experience. So we have to start with a framework that can justify thought. So we start with the Bible because of the personal God who is sovereign, omnipotent, omniscient, the attributes that we covered in the theology series. And it's because that God exists, we involve His providence in the preservation of what we have currently. Now, so we don't ask the question is, how do we know historically how we got the scriptures? How do we get the Bible originally? And that now there's history involved in that, but we don't know that we have all the history involved. We don't know that we have all the information involved. So we have to start with a framework and then analyze based on that. Analyze what evidence is reasonable and rational within the Christian framework. So we don't start with non-Christian secular worldview and then analyze history, because history is incoherent in a naturalistic framework. There's just matter in motion. There's just things happening that are incoherent. There's no such thing as universal laws of logic that everything should apply to, or should apply to everything and everything should adhere to. That's an incoherent worldview if you assume naturalism. So when people start arguing for the historical evidence, the historicity of how we got our canon, you run into problems. First of all, because we end up with history can only give you probabilities. History can only get you what probably occurred, and historians are never going to they're never going to appeal to supernatural, miraculous events or providence, because there's no way to justify that, in a naturalistic framework. So they would consider a miracle the least probable event to occur, the least likely event to occur. So when you start trying to establish the canon through the historical veracity of Scripture that is historically reliable, as we already said, you start with a framework, an assumption, presuppositions about history, how history is possible, how we can assert laws of logic that we experience now and assume that they apply in the past, that uniformities apply in the past, that morality applies in the past, that there's a connection between sense perception and the real world that applies in the past. This is a philosophical framework. You can't assume that without the scriptures. So naturalists already assume all that, which we're saying is don't let them assume that. But when they do assume that and they start analyzing history, if you say Jesus rose from the dead, they're going to say that that's the least probable explanation for the empty tomb. And so they're not going to believe that. They're going to say that it's the least likely event to have occurred, because miracles are improbable by definition, unlikely events, and so you can't appeal to an unlikely explanation to bring together all the information around the empty tomb, and the minimalist facts regarding the resurrection of Christ. They're always going to appeal to something else because you gave them the tools to work with in their naturalism. So what we're trying to get you to do is you start with a completely different worldview, a completely different approach. As you say that the scriptures that we have in our hands provide us with a coherent worldview, and then we analyze the past based on that. And so the Bible tells us and gives us information related to how we got the canon, how we get it today. So all the historical attacks on the canon by skeptics, you would simply take away their skepticism by saying that they don't have rational laws that they can justify. They don't have uniformities in nature that they can justify. They don't have the veracity of their sense perception that they can justify in their work. Sorry, the battery died. But basically, you can see that there is no separation between the worldview you start with and how you evaluate evidence. So what we're saying is, since the Christian worldview is the only thing that can make sense out of, can justify belief in laws of rationality, uniformities, historical analysis, anything that involves rational coherence, because the Christian worldview is the only thing that can account for that, we must start with the scriptures in order to continue our reasoning. So we're going to, that's going to be the integral part of our analysis of canonicity. So just get that in your mind when you're working through these things, and we're going to consider like the Catholics and the other approaches to canonicity. Okay.